I called the police because my wife was assaulting our daughter. My wife and I, after 20 years of marriage, are at a crossroads following an incident in December. We have two children who are increasingly showing their independence, though they are very good kids, honest, intelligent, and talented in their own ways. I will deliberately keep the background brief to keep this short. I have suffered from chronic major depressive disorder throughout my adult life, and one of the main struggles with my condition is that I do not handle chronic stress well. I am good in a crisis. I act quickly and rationally when needed, but I tend to shut down under prolonged stress. After 9 years in a highly stressful IT position, I resigned in November to take a break before seeking something less demanding. My last day was the Friday before Christmas. Historically, I have been the breadwinner, the creative one, the voice of reason, and the most academically accomplished. My wife has always been the organized one, as well as the better cook. She has consistently held high-level administrative positions since we met and earns a good salary. Overall, she is an excellent mother when it comes to everyday matters, organizing vacations, social activities, and so on. However, she has a bad temper, and I have recently realized that she is a covert narcissist. In recent years, we have clashed quite a bit over parenting. In the past few months, we have strongly disagreed about our daughter's new boyfriend. He is a very nice, respectful young man who cares deeply for our daughter. They seem madly in love. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, he has changed our daughter's perspective on what a normal family looks like and how it should function. To clarify, my wife has generally been the one in control of the family, and she usually gets her way. I tend to give in when there is conflict because I prefer to keep the peace, which means our kids have never truly experienced the flexibility or independence they would like. Now that our daughter has seen how different, better things can be, she has rebelled. At the end of last year, she moved in with her boyfriend's family without our knowledge. After several days of trying to convince her to return home, she only agreed to come back if changes were made at home. Evidently, the changes were not enough, and just a few weeks later, she left again. I sympathized with our daughter's position, whereas my wife started referring to her as lost and told me that I would have to deal with her in the future. She did return home, but spent as much time as possible outside the house, as she no longer felt comfortable there. This led me to initiate a conversation with my wife about our poor communication. I suggested marriage counseling to help us reconcile our differences and find a healthier way to communicate, as our conversations usually ended with her losing her temper and me giving in to keep the peace. It was not healthy. Over the rest of the year, I suggested this several times as we became more distant, to the point that I was sleeping on the couch most nights. I had also recommended years ago that she seek help for her anger issues when our son went through a difficult phase. Ironically, her response to that was, "Go to hell." After discussing my mental state with my doctor, they recommended I see a psychologist. So in December, I had 2 sessions to address my depression, burnout, and the state of our marriage. Keep in mind that I had just resigned and was under immense pressure to hand over 9 years of my work to 2 employees who were simply not ready to take it on. On Christmas Day, I put on a brave face and tried to enjoy the day with my wife's family, food, drinks, keeping up the holiday spirit. However, with the work stress I had endured, leaving my job just days before, and the lack of sleep over the past months, I was not feeling well after about 5 hours and decided to go home. That night, my wife said things needed to change. I agreed and once again suggested marriage counseling. She refused again, convinced that I was the only one with a problem. She was perfect. I was the one who needed to change. I told her I can't go to marriage counseling for both of us, and that was that. We didn't talk much after that. We had no plans for New Year's Eve or any trips during the school holidays. In Australia, the long holiday break is over Christmas and January. Things were tense, and I found it extremely difficult to talk to her because every important conversation turned into a fight. Then, the incident happened just before New Year's Eve. Our daughter was at the train station after visiting her boyfriend that day and called to see if one of us could pick her up to save her a 20-minute walk. Since it was Sunday, buses were infrequent in our area, so my wife went to get her. Apparently, in the car on the way home, my wife mentioned her sister's New Year's Eve party, while our daughter said she had already made plans with her boyfriend since we had no plans. Later, I found out that my wife had made plans for the family on Christmas Day, but simply had not told us. I also knew about our daughter's plans, but I had not mentioned them to my wife because I did not know we had any other plans. They were arguing about this as they walked through the front door while I was sitting calmly on the couch. We had a three-way discussion about who knew what and what we were going to do. I sided with my daughter, supporting her decision to keep her plans, which earned me deadly glares from my wife. She then focused on me and the fact that I did not support her stance, turning it into a fight about how we do not communicate. When I pointed out that we don't communicate because it always ends in a fight, she decided to follow our daughter to her room to verbally attack her next. I braced myself for the usual verbal tirade, followed by days of silent treatment. Then I heard my daughter scream from her room. I rushed in to see my daughter on the floor in a defensive position, arms covering her head, with my wife standing over her with blind rage on her face. I grabbed my wife's wrist and yelled at her to leave, though she quickly pulled away. I must have realized subconsciously that if I continued down this path, I would be the one ending up in the back of a police car, so instead, I repeatedly ordered my wife to get out without leaving the room. At this point, I still didn't fully know what had happened, as I had not seen anything. She eventually left the room, and we argued in the living room while I ordered her to leave the house, knowing that when she gets this angry, it takes her a long time to calm down. I just wanted her to go so I could take care of my daughter. She refused to leave, even when I threatened to call the police. So I told my daughter to join me and her brother in the living room while I made the call. The Christmas tree suffered her wrath next, and glass shards from the ornaments now littered the living room floor. After several minutes on the phone, during which I reassured my wife that I had not given them our address and could hang up at any time, I finally gave the operator our address and details of the domestic violence. After I was informed that a unit was being dispatched and ended the call, I let her know the police were on their way. I think she realized I was serious, so she angrily packed a bag and left. Of course, I called emergency services again and asked to cancel the unit, but they informed me that, given the nature of the incident, they would likely still come. Afterward, there were the usual reports, statements, protection orders, court hearings, etc. The three of us are now living in the house, and my wife has very little contact. I do not know the outcome of the criminal hearing, as we were not required to attend. We have had a few face-to-face meetings to discuss what comes next, and I have made it clear that this is the end of our marriage. I suggested that an apology to our daughter would be a good start, but almost 6 weeks later, there has been none. In our last meeting, she wanted to discuss how she could come home and fix things for the kids' sake, but I was shocked by her stance on the incident. She asked if I regretted calling the police and if I felt bad about how much it affected her. To be clear, I later found out that my wife had slapped our daughter in the face, thrown her to the ground, and kicked her before I entered the room. Of course, with a clear mind the next day, I absolutely felt I had done the right thing to protect my daughter. However, my wife believes we could have handled all of this without police involvement and that she is the victim. She is even hiding the details of the incident from her family to protect my reputation with them. There are a couple of other small conversational anecdotes she has shared that indicate the people she has spoken to about this are shocked since I have always been a gentleman in the past. She is playing the victim card hard. Ultimately, I will be the first to admit that I am not a perfect husband or father. Depression and COVID have certainly taken a lot from me, and I wish I could be better than I am. I have no doubt that my condition has had a significant impact on my wife's mental state. I am also very aware that it is not easy for others to make impartial judgments based solely on one party's statements. The situation has not changed much in recent weeks, although the silences have grown longer and the tension heavier. I have tried to maintain a calm environment at home for the children, especially for my daughter, who is still dealing with the trauma of what happened. She has returned to her studies, but her nights are longer and her responses are shorter. I see her fragile, still processing the fact that the maternal figure she once trusted now instills fear in her. My son, on the other hand, seems quieter than usual, as if evaluating every word before he speaks, as though any comment might spark another storm. Communication with my wife has been reduced to cold, formal exchanges about legal and logistical matters. She has tried a couple of times to hint at returning home, but my refusal has been firm. There is no going back. Not after what she did. Not after her lack of remorse. She hides behind her own distorted perception of events, denying the severity of the attack on our daughter. The disconnect between what happened and how she remembers it is terrifying. Even though the restraining order is still in place, part of me fears her return. Not because I believe she will physically harm us again, but because she is a woman who knows how to manipulate. Social pressure, family, playing the victim. She is slowly constructing a narrative in which I am the guilty one, where her act of violence was just a momentary loss of control caused by my lack of support. I see it coming, I hear it in the conversations she has with mutual friends. The sympathy some people show her frightens me, because it proves how easy it is for her to build an alternate reality. One in which she is not the aggressor, but the victim of a family that has abandoned her. Amid all this, my mind is in a constant battle between depression and the need to move forward. There are moments when I find myself paralyzed, staring into the void, wondering how we got to this point. Other times, the determination to protect my children gives me the strength to carry on, to ensure that they do not repeat their parents' mistakes, that they grow up knowing love should not coexist with fear. I have considered returning to work. I need stability, and although the idea of going back to a stressful environment terrifies me, I know it is financially necessary. I cannot afford to remain idle, but finding a suitable job is not easy, especially with the emotional exhaustion I carry. Meanwhile, the days pass in a tense routine, waiting for my wife's next move, wondering if justice will be enough or if I will have to face new manipulation tactics. I wonder how much longer I can keep going without breaking. And above all, I wonder if my children will ever find peace in all of this. A few more weeks have passed, and the weight of the conflict still lingers in the air, like a persistent echo of everything we have been through. My children and I try to move forward, but every little detail reminds us that the storm has not yet passed. My daughter has become even more reserved. Before, though distant, she at least interacted with my son and me with some degree of normalcy. Now, every time her phone rings or she receives a message, I see the fear in her eyes. She has not told me directly, but I am certain that my wife has tried to contact her in some way. I have thought about asking her, but I do not want to pressure her more than she already has been. I do not want her to feel she has no space to process what has happened. At the same time, it frustrates me that I cannot fully protect her from the shadow my wife still casts over her. My son, on the other hand, has started to show signs of anger. He does not express it in words, but I see it in the way he clenches his fists when his mother is mentioned, in how he avoids certain conversations, or how he has begun spending more time alone. I know he feels the injustice of the situation, and the worst part is that I do not have satisfying answers for him. How do I explain that the person who is supposed to love and protect him has chosen to blind herself to her own mistakes? That she has decided to play the victim rather than take responsibility for her actions? The legal uncertainty still weighs on us. I have spoken with lawyers, counselors, and anyone who could guide me on what comes next. The restraining order is still in effect, but the legal process is slow. I have been told it could take months to be fully resolved, and that keeps me in a constant state of alert. What will happen when a final ruling is issued? Will it be enough to keep us safe, or will she find a way to impose herself back into our lives? The other day, I received a message from a mutual friend of my wife and me. It was not a direct attack, but the intention was clear. They wanted to know if I was sure about what I was doing, if maybe I was exaggerating, that maybe my wife had simply reached a breaking point and that everyone deserves a second chance. I did not respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I am tired of justifying myself. People who are not there do not understand. They do not know what it means to see your daughter on the floor, terrified. They do not know what it is like to live with someone who refuses to accept the truth, who rewrites history to fit her narrative. What worries me most is that my wife is not someone who gives up easily. She has always known how to manipulate situations to her advantage, how to make people see her as a strong woman, a victim of a husband who did not understand her. I wonder how many more have fallen for her story. How many of those who once supported us now doubt my version of events? And worst of all, I do not know how much longer I can withstand this emotional drain. I still have not returned to work, not because I do not want to, but because I do not feel capable. Just leaving the house makes me anxious. I have become a paranoid man, worried that at any moment someone will show up with a message from my wife or with a twisted version of what happened. But I know that sooner or later I will have to face the world again. My children need me, and I need to regain some sense of stability even though it seems impossible now. For now, I keep going, day by day, trying to stay strong, trying to be the father my children need. But the battle is far from over, and deep down, I know that the worst may still be ahead. Time continues to pass, but the feeling of unease remains. The routine at home has become a series of calculated moments where each of us tries to adapt to a new normal without success. My daughter remains trapped in a bubble of silence, and my son in a cycle of contained anger. And I remain the mediator, the one trying to find answers when most of the questions have not even been asked. Recently, a few acquaintances have dared to ask about my wife. Not directly, but with that kind of subtle concern disguised as curiosity. It must be hard for her. Maybe she needs help. Have you thought about talking to her again? My answer has been the same every time. No, not because I have not thought about it, but because I know that any attempt at communication would be giving her another opportunity to weave another lie, to drag us back into her manipulation. The process has been long and exhausting, but we have finally reached a point of resolution. Not because the path has been easy or because the wounds have fully healed, but because we have made the necessary decisions to move forward. After many conversations, legal consultations, and sleepless nights, I decided it was time to close this chapter of our lives with a definitive change. Moving away was not just a tempting idea, it was a necessity. The restraining order remained in place until the court ruling was issued, and at that moment, I realized there was no reason to stay in a place that only brought us painful memories. The move was difficult for the children. My daughter, though still affected by what had happened, understood that a fresh start was the best thing for all of us. With each passing day, I saw her become a little more relaxed, a little freer. She no longer had to look over her shoulder, anticipating her mother's next outburst. My son, on the other hand, took longer to accept the change. The anger he had accumulated over months still burned inside him, and though I knew it came from a place of protection, I worried that the resentment would eventually consume him. But with time and therapy, he began to release the weight he had been carrying. My wife, or rather my ex-wife, did not accept the final separation easily. She insisted on meetings, empty apologies, and attempts at manipulation. But the decision had been made. There was no return, no concessions. Her version of events never changed, and her inability to take responsibility for her actions left her trapped in a story that no longer had an audience. Finally, when she realized she no longer had control over us, she stopped trying. The legal process concluded with a ruling in our favor. Though my ex-wife never faced severe consequences, the truth was documented, and that gave me some peace of mind. But beyond the legal proceedings, what truly marked the end of everything was the moment we left that house, closing the door behind us for the last time without looking back. Now we are in a new home, in a different city. I will not say that everything is completely resolved because pain does not disappear overnight. But we have built something better. My children are finding their own path without the shadow of fear. As for me, I am still in therapy, still learning to live without the constant anxiety of another crisis. I have returned to work in a healthier environment with less pressure and more balance. And though there are still nights when I wake up with memories of the past, I know that each day is one step further from what was and one step closer to what we can become. The storm has passed, and though the scars remain, we have finally found peace.